Melissa,
Sarah,
what are we doing today?
we're going all the way back to grade 6 to do a book report with Violet.
Woo!
Violet, this is actually your second time on Could Read, Should Read, Must Read. We're really, really happy to have you back again. You were on our summer roundup challenge, our summer challenge roundup episode in the summer, which was an audio-only episode, and we're really excited to have you back with us on Rogers TV today.
Thank you for having me.
And Melissa, I love watching Violet develop as a reader. And it brings me back, and I'm sure it brings you back and Tom back to, when you were kind of fledgling readers and developing your passion. And Violet, I'm curious, how would you describe that feeling of getting lost in a book?
Well, it's definitely hard to explain because you're lost. Yeah, but I just feel like you almost become friends with the characters and you just forget everything that's around you. The idea of just sitting down and cozying up and just forgetting about everything that's around you.
That's perfect. And that's exactly what it is. You are lost, but in the best way possible, right?
Yeah, it's super fun to watch her build up that love of reading and kind of escape into things. And then when she does make the connections sort of like in her life, it's like, it feels very, very satisfying. And I know, Sarah, we kind of reminisce a lot about ourselves as young readers, and we got to keep this PG. I know that you and I got into maybe some racier, more scandalous reads at a younger age than we should have, so maybe no referencing Sweet Valley High while I'm here with my very innocent daughter. But what are your memories of kind of becoming a reader and discovering that passion? Did you have any teachers along the way who really kind of helped foster that with you?
I certainly did. And, I feel like my mom always read to me when I was young, and I liked that. But when I was probably about, I think, 10, an aunt got me a collection of books. And it was like, Swiss Family Robinson and Robinson Crusoe and a lot of the kind of classic children's books. And just like Violet described, it was, this feeling of getting lost and feeling like, oh, I can enter these worlds and not even leave my house. And I fell in love with reading really at that point, and it just kind of developed from there. And what I think was so formative for me as a reader, kind of in like the middle grades, was an English class I had. The teacher's name was Mrs. Amundsen. I'll never forget. So this is grade 7, so a little bit past where Violet's at, but not that much. And we had to read a book called Gentle Hands by Emmy Kerr. And we had to write essentially a book report for it. And she really loved my response. And she actually read parts of my paper that I had written out to the class. And it was this moment for me, I'll never forget it, of wow, I can have a connection to a book and I can respond to it and it can mean something. And it can be something that can be shared. And it was right there. It was determined that I was going to become an English major. Little did I really know at that moment. But I mean, and that's what we're still doing. We're reading books and we're responding to them. So
Yeah.
I think for me, that was such a huge informative experience. So.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah, and to think, grade 7, Violet, our little baby Violet's already in grade 6, so not that far off. And, welcome to the 21st century. The old school book report has become, a podcast episode or TV show at this point. But I do have to hand it to her teacher, Madame Berkshire, grade 6 at C.C. Laughlin in Corner Brook, Newfoundland. And she really gives a lot of different initiatives to her students to really encourage them to read and then to respond to the books. And she allows them to be creative with how they represent what they're reading and what books they're engaging with. And that's why Violet's here with us today, because she has to do this book report. And she has chosen as her book today The Hunger Games. I've got the whole box set here from the way back in the day, but it's the original Hunger Games book that she wants to talk about. So Violet, let's get to work. You got a book report to do. So give us a summary of The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins.
Yeah, so it's based in a post-apocalyptic world, and it follows a girl named Katniss Everdeen. And Katniss lives in kind of a sad place. The entire place is dealing with extreme poverty, and she loses her father in a mine explosion. And she has to provide for her mother and her younger sister. And she became a really good hunter over time and created a bond with her best friend, and his name is Gale, which leads me to the Hunger Games. The Hunger Games is an annual tradition where 2 children from each district, 1 male and 1 female, compete in a pretty much war, which is quite sad, where they fight to the death. Part of my assignment is that I'm not allowed to spoil it, so I'll leave it for you guys to figure it out.
Yes, we'll do our best to not have any spoilers in the book about what or in the episode about what happens. Sometimes our very clever readers can sort of read, or listeners can read between the lines and pick up some things, but we'll do our best. You said something really interesting there about how there's only one person who can survive. So obviously you're reading through this book, you're becoming attached to people, or maybe you're starting to dislike different characters. It's very emotional, but does it also kind of create a motor that makes you want to keep reading this notion that most of the characters are going to die?
Well, yeah, and it's kind of sad too, because she creates friendships even though she's dealing with such hard, like core memories that she's going to create. And she makes friends, and she knows that one of them's going to die, either her or her new friend.
And so do you want to kind of share some of the relationships and any particular special ones that she develops with these friends that she makes that she's unfortunately having to kind of compete against in the worst case scenario?
Yeah, there's one person that really stands out, and her name is Rue. Rue, the way that Katniss explains Rue is 12 years old, and that's the youngest you can be for the Hunger Games. And she believes that Rue reminds her of her sister and a little piece of home, which is quite heartwarming and special, especially through all the gore and the sadness in this book, because it's a pretty intense book, right? That you could still find friendships and pieces of home.
Yeah, I think that in some ways that's what kind of draws us to these types of stories. Like you were using words like gory and intense, and that's exactly what it feels like when you're reading the story. But there's also these little kind of like gentle moments where we see bits of humanity that are kind of uplifting too. So I really connected with that relationship with Rue as well. And it also gives Katniss an opportunity to kind of maybe revolt a little bit or show her disagreement with the Capitol, and so she gets to kind of reveal parts of herself too. Who would you say is your favorite character?
I think it would have to be Rue. For all the reasons that I just explained. Yeah, I just feel like like I said, it's a really intense book, but through all the intensity, she just comes out and just brings some light to Katniss in the story.
And, but it is Katniss's story, right? And so I'm sure that she has got to have been like a captivating character. And, I think maybe even like the kind of contrast with maybe the innocence of Rue and maybe the more kind of, I don't know, fierceness of Katniss might have been brought up. So, what was your connection to Katniss? Were you worried about her? Were you connected to her?
Well, I feel like she has forced herself to become this, because all she's been through, she's forced herself to become a mysterious person, like a secretive person. And I think that does tell something about her, but it's hard to get to know her when she's trying to hide everything, when she's grown up, learning to protect herself, to keep that shield of not letting people know her true self, which it's good for the story, but it's also hard to like love her as much as you love Rue because she's just so secretive almost.
Yeah, you and I have talked about this, because we both read the book and we've connected about it just informally as well. And you had some really interesting readings of Katniss because you really wanted to root for her, and you were, but you never really had the same bond with her. It was like Rue had such an innocence that you really could kind of like connect with her more than you could with Katniss. And maybe, we read the book and we know there's other books in the series as well. We also watched the movie. Did you feel like the movie helped you to see more of Katniss, or did it kind of even narrow the scope of what you could know about her?
I will say, this might seem a little bit crazy, but I feel like the book was more descriptive and more, it was more vivid. I could see more in the book than the movie, which I know is crazy, but I just feel like the movie kind of stops the barrier of imagination, and the book you can just really let it yourself flow, and I felt like it was a lot more interesting, but most things that I pictured were quite similar in the movie. One thing that did throw me off was the capital city. When Katniss shows up, it looks much less brighter than I thought it would be. It's a lot gloomier and sad. But the more that I think about that, I think it's because it's still from Katniss's eyes, and Katniss is shown there knowing that her doom is near, and so they can't really show it colorfully if you know that she will die possibly. So
yeah, very ominous.
I like that interpretation of why the capital city doesn't necessarily match up to, what you thought it would look like. Because because this is Katniss' story, right? You're thinking about it through her perspective. And I do think you're really onto something. I feel like for those of us who are really big book lovers, when there is an adaptation on the screen, I love that phrase of like, it stopped your imagination. Because you do develop these very special and unique relationships with the characters, and how things look and how they feel in a book. And obviously a film adaptation is going to be a little bit different. So really great observations there. I appreciate that, Violet.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I was like, I could feel my heart growing a little bit when she was like, "This is not even rehearsed. She's just like right from the heart." This whole barrier to imagination, I could have cried. It was gorgeous.
Right. That's great. Yeah. But do you feel like it did ultimately, like it was a nice, I guess, companion to watch the film and be able to have read the book?
Yeah, I feel like I would have understood the movie like barely if I hadn't read the book.
Right.
Yeah,
and it's interesting because we're talking about the movie and the book as sort of companion pieces, which even when you were reading it, we were building up to like, over Christmas break we're going to make sure we watch the movie, like kind of seeing it as a fulsome experience with those two modes. But the Hunger Games, I mean, it's been around for, at least I read it about 15 years ago. I was kind of joking with Violet, like I read that original trilogy before she was even born. And she's still, it's the same set of boxes. That set of books has been in our house literally her entire life. And she suddenly kind of developed an interest in reading it, which was kind of funny because there's a really famous scene at the beginning of the book, which a lot of people are familiar with, and it's become a meme. Do you want to explain what scene that is? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, so it's like one of the most famous scenes is when Primrose Everdeen, Katniss's sister, gets chosen to represent their district in the Hunger Games. But Katniss famously says, I volunteer for tribute, and goes in her sister's place. And this meme has basically become when it's like, does anybody want to play soccer or something? And someone goes, I volunteer for tribute. And it's all over the internet now.
Yeah, and so like, she sort of said like, am I allowed to read this? Like she didn't know if it was still kind of out of her, range of reading or whatever. I was like, no, like let's do this. So we kind of read it together, like so that, and then talked about it. And yeah, I just feel like sort of these like growing circles of people who are reading the book. And I mean, it's been popular for over 15 years across a wide range of different readers. What do you think? Like, why has this book had such lasting popularity with such a wide audience?
I think it's because Suzanne Collins she explains it all so well, and even if you're not the greatest reader or not like a poet and you don't understand all the meaningful stuff, you still understand the meaning of the book and how intriguing and intense it is.
Yeah. At the end of the day, it can come back to just really good writing, right? If someone is a master at that craft, then they can bring you into that world. I think there's something also to that post-apocalyptic kind of genre. Like, I think going back to what you were saying earlier about it shows the best of humanity and the worst of humanity. And I think it also kind of gives us things to look out for, maybe, things that we really know we do not want in our societies and our communities, but also things that we want to strive for, in moments of hardship. So I do think it's a genre that's appealing to a lot of people. Sarah, you're no stranger to this type of setting. You and I've read lots of Margaret Atwood over the years that would fit into this. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up Station 11, which we both read, and, kind of fits in this camp too.
Yeah, I think that whole idea of like dystopian worlds, post-apocalyptic or apocalyptic narratives, there is so much power, like you said, and it's really the worst version of man against himself, right? But I think there's so many different ways that you can go. It can go more of like a horror, which I think, The Hunger Games certainly plays around with that because there's some, kind of terrifying things that happen within The Hunger Games. And I actually do have my copy that I read, probably about 15 years ago when it came out. But yeah, but then you mentioned Station 11 and I feel like of all the kind of post-apocalyptic, if I can even say it, stories or books that I've read, that is by far my favorite because I feel like there is this, the triumph of humanity in art and culture and what makes us human is really what that book is about. And it gives me hope that even if the worst case scenario happens, that survival is not enough, right? That there needs to be beauty in the world for humans to be able to not just survive, but also to thrive. So.
Yeah, to live, not just to survive. And yeah, when I think about that book, the parts that sort of, well, obviously the first part, because it was so much like COVID, like it was such a bizarre experience to read, like however many, I guess 4 or 5 years on after the onset of COVID-19. But the parts that stand out to me are the lengths to which people went to keep their theater troupe alive. Like they put themselves in danger constantly. Like they didn't have to be doing that, but they just saw it as so important that they were willing to risk so much. So just that concept stayed with me a lot. But I'm probably going to get some of the details wrong here. But do you remember the scene in that book when they're always going out and exploring and trying to kind of find supplies and things to help them survive, and they find a house that's almost untouched, and there's like a little girl, and I think, like, do they find her in her room that she had basically just gone to bed, but the house is pristine, but they give her sort of this very kind, they put her to rest basically, and they treat her with a lot of dignity. And I just remember thinking that was like a really touching part of that book. And it's not completely unlike with Rue in the Hunger Games, when putting her to rest is not only something that shows that humanity, but also gives Katniss an opportunity to communicate something more about how she feels about her situation and her role in the Capitol and the Hunger Games and everything. So yeah, I think there's a lot of parallels there.
Definitely. Yeah, this idea that, I think with Katniss, even though she is, competing, for her life against, these other districts and people from these districts, that there can be this connection, and there can be like a sense of honor and humanity that, kind of prevails throughout that. So, and I think that she's, someone that becomes like a renegade in that regard. I mean, that's why she ends up becoming kind of the hero of the story, right? It's because, she goes against what has always been done with these games and kind of plays it in her own way.
So Violet, it's time. And I think she's on track for an A here, Madame Berkshire. I don't know about you, but I'm seeing good grades in your future here. But you still have to answer what is the most important question that Sarah and I ask all of our guests and each other on this show. In your opinion, is The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins a could read, a should read, or a must read?
I think it depends on your age range, but because if I was a little bit younger, I would be like, I'm horrified of this. No, I'm so scared. But I think I read it. Anybody older than me, I feel like this is totally a must read.
Awesome. Yeah, and of course, we have the rest of the series. We got to read that. And Sunrise on the Reaping, I think, is the name of the second prequel that is coming out next month. So, I mean, Suzanne Collins is still at it. She's still writing with, and, working in this world. And I think that'll be interesting in terms of the trajectory of your reading these characters, kind of seeing maybe more of Katniss become a bit more evident, maybe some more of her motivations. And so, again, to Suzanne Collins's credit, that's probably what she's trying to work towards, right? And you commented on, how skillful of a writer that you think she is. Yeah. So thank you so much for talking about the Hunger Games with us and allowing us to be part of your book report.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, while we have Violet here, we wanted to kind of do a little bit of picking the brain of a young reader. Sarah and I have been really interested in a list of books that NPR curates every year. I think it goes back to, I'm going to say 2013, 2012, something like that. And when the 2024 list came out, particularly since that was the first year of the podcast, we were a little delighted with ourselves, a little pat on the back that we had read quite a number of books on that list. So I think between myself and Sarah and Violet, we've probably read over half of them, I think. So we actually have some of the graphic novel selections that were on that list that Violet read here. And I thought we could maybe go through them a little bit and get her take on them as a young reader, but also in relation to maybe what the people who were making the list were looking for, as opposed to maybe the target audience for some of these books. You ready? All right, so the very first one we're going to talk about is Lunar New Year Love Story. Very timely. Happy Lunar New Year to those celebrating. By Jean Luen Yang and Nguyen Pham. You read this almost exactly 1 year ago, I think, actually. Yeah. And then since you are inclined to reread, it's been reread a few times. How'd you feel about Lunar New Year Love Story?
Yeah, I'm not too surprised it was on that one. It's a pretty like publicized book. There's like a podcast about it. It's good. It's a good book, yep. But it's not exactly to my liking, considering it's a love story. It's just kind of gross at some points. But mostly it's a pretty good book also.
Yes, fighting to the death, yes. Kissing, no, in Violet's opinion. So the gross comes in with the love stories, not with, violent gladiator styles.
Melissa, not unlike our feelings about holiday reads, we'd rather murder mayhem.
Absolutely, yes, like mother, like daughter. Let's get some bloodshed in this holiday read. But yeah, this was a good one. You did enjoy it enough to read it a couple of times, certainly. But and I think it was a nice way of kind of exploring the Lunar New Year holiday along with this love story, and it's sort of a rite of passage. So that was a good one. Okay, next I'm going to bring up Kay is in Trouble by Gary Clement. I read this one last year as well. Thoughts on this one? Surprised it was on the list? What'd you think of it?
I'm pretty surprised this one was on the list. I think, in my opinion, because, hey, I'm a kid, I can get in trouble. That's okay, because it's about getting in trouble, a kid being in trouble. But that's just normal for me, which suggests that probably wasn't kids who chose these selections. Probably parents who were like, this is funny, it'll teach my kids something. But I don't know, it was an okay book. It was just nice. It was like pretty quick and it was nice to read, but it wasn't exactly like a must read in my opinion.
Right.
It's kind of like a little tiny comic book.
Yeah, there's like a little set of comic strips in here, and it did kind of remind me of like a Dennis the Menace kind of character. So I had a similar thought of like, you know, I don't know that it was particularly meaningful. I would have described it more as like quirky. It's like about this little kid who goes around sort of being misunderstood, and then when his actions are misunderstood, he ends up getting in trouble. And when I was saying it to Violet, she was like, yeah, getting in trouble when you're a kid is like kind of a daily occurrence. It's not like book worthy. And I thought that was like an interesting kind of like read on it. So I can see how like it was quirky, it was cute. Yeah, so I was a little bit surprised to see it on the list, but also happy because it was on our shelf. Had you heard of that one, Sarah? I got it at Walmart. Like, I think it's pretty.
No, I'm not, because William is still such a, you know, really, he's not even fully reading yet. We haven't made it to those kinds of books yet. So I'm sure give me like a year or two and, you know, I'll be very well versed in those kinds of books. But so this is really great. And so based on your recommendations, these might kind of influence some books that I expose William to, you know, as he gets older.
William will love that one. That is, isn't it, Violet? That's like
yes.
a William book.
That's
like,
a William book.
Yeah. Violet knows William. She's spent some time with him, so it could be W is in trouble.
Yeah. And there's a sequel to that one coming out this year too. I can't remember what it's called, but there's a new one. Yeah. Yeah, so, and yeah, I could totally see William just getting a kick out of this character kind of, and he's really independent roaming the streets, but then like something will happen that turns everything on its head. So yeah,
And
that
he,
would be a good one.
He like talks to animals and like he meets
yeah.
like an ant and the ant's like da, 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 da.
Yeah, it's really cute. Well, and now on a totally other end of the spectrum, this one's called Dear Dad by J.J. Patton. This one's actually a memoir as well. So Violet, how about this one? Did you enjoy this one? How'd you encounter it? Were you surprised to see it on the list?
I was honestly surprised because I found it at like a school book fair, and it was like the only graphic novel there. I was just like, oh, this is here. I'll just grab it because I wanted to read something, right? I don't want to be given $20 and not spend it. Like
You not enjoy it, you mean?
yeah, exactly. And so I got it. It was a pretty good book. I mean, it was pretty quick. Like I read it on the bus. It wasn't too long, but like for someone who's like just getting into reading, I feel like that'd be an interesting book. Yeah, it's about like it's kind of a sad story, but like the way that they explain it is like kind of in a kid way and explaining it not to sound sad in any way.
Did you want to say what it was about?
Yeah, it's about a girl whose father goes to prison. It's not explained why, but anyways, she ends up like dealing with a lifetime without a dad, and then finally her dad comes back and finds out that he's really into coding, and she follows in his footsteps, and they create an app to connect parents and their children, the parents who are stuck in jail.
Yeah. It's really cool, actually, and so Douglas,
it's like a memoir, you said, right? So this is like based on a true story. Wow.
Yeah, and actually at the end, so Douglas, our more mischievous offspring, had also got his hands on this book, but we didn't really know what he's always off doing something. So, but he was like, I need a device, I need a tablet, I need to download an app. And we were like, okay, well, what is the app? And, you know, like we're going to need more information. So in this book, oh yeah, this happened the other night, you were at soccer. He wanted to download the app and it's called Photo Patch. which is actually what they generate, but it's for children to communicate with their parents in prison. But so it was very confusing for us why he wanted this app, and then he like revealed that in the book that that's where he had encountered it. So it's just that the sort of sequence of how we were approached about the request that was very confusing. But yeah, in the back they actually have photographs like about the father and daughter. It's really, really sweet. I was not surprised to see this one on that list. I'm sure you weren't necessarily too, but that's a good one for sure. The fourth one that we had that was on the list is called How It All Ends. Look at that gorgeous cover.
That is beautiful.
Right? Well, what'd you think of this one? Were you surprised to see that one on the list?
I wasn't necessarily surprised because you got that one for me, and you have especially good taste for those kinds of things.
Thank you.
You just come back from a bookshop and you're like, look what I got you. So yeah, it's a good book, and I could see it being on the NPR thing, but yeah.
Yeah, and this one's about a young girl going through a time of transition, I think.
Yeah, she gets pulled up from high school. She gets pulled up from high school into middle. She missed her 9th grade of middle school, and they pull her up to high school because they have too many people in their middle school, and they had to pull people up. Anyway, she was not expecting it at all, and she just goes through this sense of not belonging. And no, it's an interesting book. It keeps you intriguing. It's like all these new feelings, and yeah.
Yeah. So we were excited that you were part of that conversation, with these current books. But as anyone who follows us on social media knows, Violet released her must-reads of 2024. Interestingly, none of these books were on that list.
No.
So what do you think is up with that? Your list as a young reader did not include any of these, but NPR's list included all of these. What do you think?
I think probably because they're all in different genres of deep, not so deep, very sad, very happy, right? And they were like, let's just pick one from all of them that the covers look good on and might be interesting.
Yeah.
So
I kind of think there's, the adult reading the book, there's a lot of themes here that I think parents feel really relieved when books handle these kinds of themes well, and they're excited to sort of share them with their kids too, to say, oh, you're going through a moment of transition, here's a book that might help you understand that. So that was my reading on how these particular books ended up in that one. But then also I think Kay's in Trouble was just sort of a lighthearted kind of thing to add, because I think there was a bit of nostalgia. I think that was at play there.
Well, and I was going to talk about the nostalgia piece of it and why some of these books might be chosen. Because, if you have an adult reader reading a book that's been, written for children, they're going to have their own kind of adult perspective. But also that nostalgia part is strong, right? And so something might remind you of something that you experienced or remember from your childhood, but you're looking at it through an adult lens, and that's a different experience than being a kid encountering something in a book for the first time. And so maybe they should get more youth readers to kind of read some of these books and then pick their top ones. Maybe Violet, you should be working for NPR.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Ooh, what a dream. Yeah absolutely. And I think that maybe for kids too, the whole idea of reading for pleasure, that's the gold standard, right? If they're just reading to enjoy it. So
I'm only reading for pleasure. That's it.
Or for Madame Berkshire's book reports.
Oh,
no, just
true.
Well, thank you both so much. Two of my favorite people sitting today talking about books on a really snowy day here. I can't think of anything I'd rather be doing. So thank you, Violet. Great job. Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts on The Hunger Games and on those 4 books from that NPR Best Books of 2024. And Sarah, so lovely to be with you today. Great to see you.
Wonderful to see both of you. Excellent job, Violet. It was an honor to do this with you.
thank you.
See you next time.
Bye.